I'm Felicia Shakiba, and this is CPO Playbook, where we solve a business challenge in every episode. Most M&A deals fall not because of bad spreadsheets or sloppy lawyers, but because leaders ignore the people side of the deal. Buyers spend 95% of their energy on valuation and due diligence, but only 5% on integration. Cameron Bishop, managing director of Raincatcher, was taught a big lesson. Successful deals require deep cultural understanding and integration planning. Otherwise, the shiny new acquisition quickly becomes an expensive disaster. Cameron Bishop is a veteran M&A executive who has acquired and integrated over 50 companies worldwide, building businesses from millions to hundreds of millions in revenue, while transforming cultures and unlocking long-term value. Cameron, so great to see you. Welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
You've said people and culture are the cornerstone of empire building. When a PE firm acquires a business, what's the first cultural misstep that usually gets made?
Well, in a lot of cases, private equity firms are so focused on the industry fundamentals or the business fundamentals, they don't fully assess and evaluate the corporate culture, the hierarchy, and how things flow through that organization. So they're oftentimes quite process-driven and financial analyst, essentially driven. And even though they've realized they have to have the people, especially in intangible kinds of businesses where the people are the assets and those fixed assets get up and go home every day, assuming they're actually working in an office these days,
right?
That they undervalue some of those factors. And one of the reasons I became an investment banker is because I saw so many cases where the representatives or professionals representing the seller of a company didn't fully vet the interested buyer. So in our world, we often joke that we're 50% investment banker and 50% match.com because we work very hard to understand the cultural imperatives and style of our clients when they're selling a company so that we can appropriately match them with buyers that meet their sort of their mission, vision, values to help create a strong alignment and much greater opportunity for success once an acquisition is made.
Walk us through how you approach aligning leadership after an acquisition, especially when founders are stepping aside or staying on.
Yeah. Well, if you're on the buy side, which as you mentioned in your introduction, I was for many, many years, having acquired about 50 businesses. I think we successfully integrated 49 out of those 50. And I'll share a story on that, which is when you get a PhD in acquisition integration is usually when you screw it up. So they need to really understand and listen to the people and get to know them on an individual basis. It's really all about asking questions and then listening. And on the buy side of the table, oftentimes, especially if it's a strategic buyer of a business, there's a general and almost pervasive attitude that, hey, our company's buying you, we're better than you, so you're going to do everything our way, or it's our way or the highway. And that is a absolute prescription for either failure or far less than a complete success in the process.
Yeah, that's interesting because there are many a times I have seen this play out, and it becomes a real struggle because then if there's a disconnect between the PE firm and the executive team, then the executive team doesn't really get that buy-in. And so that filters down or ripple, like a ripple effect, right? Ripples down to employees. And that feeling is noticeable, even when executive teams don't necessarily always share how they're feeling about the PE firm or whatnot, but they're less, I guess you could say, encouraged to have that buy-in. And so it's just this ripple effect going down into employee and affecting employee engagement. Would you say that that's accurate?
Yeah, that's very true. And if they don't have the buy-in, that's generally because they're not asking enough questions and asking for input from the critical team that's going to manage the business on an ongoing basis, as well as effectively manage that integration. In our firm, we developed over time a really efficient process that it was a very collaborative, team-driven process on the buy side. So, for example, I specialized in doing roll-ups in media and conference and trade show industries. So we had a team, our operating team was also kind of like our SWAT M&A team. So if you've got printing to do, our VP of production was involved, our VP of communications, human resources, technology, and each of them were assigned an area of diligence to complete on the business. And then we would all come back to and share our findings as a team, because what we often found is that if each of those specialized areas does everything in isolation, they don't understand. They've identified either an opportunity or a problem. If they go to fix that in isolation, oftentimes that has a ripple effect and can surprisingly impact, positively or negatively, usually for the worse, another specialized area of the business. So we'd often say, well, wait a minute. If you do that, then I've got to do this. And I, as the senior executive, would share those conversations. Somebody's got to make the ultimate decision in the process. But that collaborative team effort, where our team is working directly with their counterpart in the firm being acquired, helps establish those relationships. But it also helps to identify best practices. And if you go into an acquisition with an arrogant, my way or the highway attitude, you never adopt any of those best practices. So our approach was always to identify things that the company being acquired did better than we were doing them, and adopt and adapt those and implement them across our company. That oftentimes created that instant credibility and began to create that alignment between the acquired and the acquirer.
You touched on something really important, which was adaptability. And I think that is the kind of core of what we're leading into, is being able to adapt enough to kind of go along with what that vision or, merged vision or new vision might be for the company. But that is harder said than done. How do you think about adaptability, either from like a CEO's perspective or an executive leadership team's perspective? How difficult is that really to take on?
Well, in my experience, it depends a lot on the style of the senior executive and his or her team, because his or her senior management team tends to take on the style of the CEO. The old expression is the fish almost always rots from the head first. Well, the symbolism there is if the CEO is a toxic individual or has a very belligerent style, that tends to become pervasive in at least the senior management team and could often have ripple effect throughout the entire corporation, which sets the tone for the corporate culture. And if they don't have a strategic interest and plan for corporate culture, de facto, they are determining the corporate culture. So going into the process, it's best to define what your corporate culture is going to be and work to make that happen. And the number one part of that is over communication. Especially in an acquisition situation, you simply cannot communicate enough about what's going on, because if you don't communicate effectively and frequently, that creates a vacuum, and rumor fills that vacuum in a heartbeat, and it's worse than COVID once it exists. So your goal is to never leave anything open to speculation.
We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Cole Napper, host of Directionally Correct, the #1 people analytics podcast in the world. Come check out our podcast that dives deep into topics like people analytics, workforce planning, and talent intelligence, helping leaders across the globe navigate the future of work with insight and a little bit of fun.
Back to the show. I couldn't have said it better myself, Cameron. It's so true on so many levels. I always like to say that a leadership who does something bad is just not as bad as leadership doing nothing, right? Because when leadership does nothing, there's this enablement to what's happening, and whether it be good behavior or bad behavior. And that communication, like the constant communication, communicating the right things and knowing what not to communicate, I think is also kind of important, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like not to stir fear in the unknown if you don't always know what's going on, but being able to say, hey, this is what we don't know, but here's how we're going to find out, like having this plan put in place of what's going to happen. Because you, as a leader in a leadership team, you don't always know the future. And I don't think anybody could say that because, like you said, major things can happen. COVID could happen. AI could pop up, in our lifetime and just throw a wrench in all of our plans. And sometimes those things are really great, right? So I think what you said about communication is critical, which really does stem into culture. And when you think about building companies through several acquisitions, that leads to another question, which I have is, how do you integrate multiple cultures into one cohesive unit? Because this could be sometimes when another company comes in or they're merging, this is a big event. How do you do that?
Sure. Well, of course, so my example here certainly can depend on the size of the company being acquired. So I did a turnaround on a $60 million 501c3 under a 3-year management contract. And I utilized the same technique there when I stepped into that organization that I used in all of my acquisitions. And it's a very simple process. I'm kind of a grinder, and this is a grinder process. If you invest into it up front, it pays tremendous dividends. So again, we would take our senior management team, or in the case of the turnaround deal, I did it all myself. We had a process we called Start, Stop, Keep. We scheduled 15-minute interviews with every single employee. In the turnaround, there were 220 employees. I spent 15 minutes with every single employee. And you begin to build a personal relationship with those individuals because they can see that you're willing to take time to meet them and hear them. And in those meetings, I didn't do the talking. I asked those 3 questions and I listened. So the first question always was, what do you want to make sure this company continues to do? What's important to you? And that lays the framework for that corporate culture. The second question is, what would you like to see the company start doing? So you've asked 2 positive questions. It's amazing at any level in the company, people can have really good, compelling ideas that can be monetized. And if you do take one of those ideas and you make certain to give them credit and recognition for it, you've got a loyal employee for life. And you've also improved the business. The third question is the negative, but by the time you get to the negative, you pretty much already know the answer because you've heard what's important and what they'd like to start. But the last one is, what would you like to see the company stop or discontinue doing? Then you can aggregate all that information, and that helps formulate your overall plan. If you communicate what you've learned back out to those employees, then they begin to realize, wow, this individual, this new president, CEO, whatever the title is, he does value us and understands what we could bring to the table in the business. And we often found in our acquisitions that there was significant talent at the middle level that was being stymied or sort of pushed down by senior management. In one of the acquisitions we did, it was a deal in the land, it was about a $25 million deal. We found that the senior level management was so sort of power hungry and insular and somewhat toxic that We terminated the top 7 or 8 senior executives of that company, and we identified replacements for every one of them. And in that business, they were underperforming the industry averages in terms of profit margins. And within 18 months, we were performing at or above industry averages by allowing the cream to rise to the top based on talent at the middle level that we had recognized and promoted and rewarded with, obviously better compensation and incentive packages.
So I love this qualitative data collection that you do, because it's something that we do at CPO Playbook, and it is such a richness of information that we can understand culturally how people react, even how people speak about those challenges is really telling. And the themes that will come out of that qualitative data can really support what our predictions might be for value creation or culture and so forth. And so I think it's just such a smart thing to do. I love the stop, start, continue format. I think Netflix also does that type of feedback, if I remember correctly. And it's very powerful. I think that very few PE firms or investment bankers, will do this because it does take time, but the amount of information, it's almost like really preparing the dough, before it goes in the oven and hoping that the oven does the job, right? It's like the type of ingredients that really go into it is really what's the most important, even though it takes a little bit more time.
Exactly. Yeah, the challenge also for private equity firms to execute on that type of a strategy is that the vast majority, it's not 100%, but the vast majority of private equity professionals come through MBA programs. They started as, say, a financial analyst, but they have not worked at an operating level inside a company before. So they don't have, and these are super smart individuals, never met a dumb private equity person, super smart, but they don't necessarily view the world in the same way that an operating executive does. And because they're not going to operate that company, they bet their horse on the senior manager, the CEO in particular, and his or her senior team as well to handle all of those factors in a business. So I don't think I've seen a case, I'm sure it's happened, where the PE guys or gals have gotten their hands dirty themselves and been deep down in the weeds at a detailed level. Now, sometimes after they own the business, they'll host a dinner and bring second tier management to those kind of meetings. And that's a practice that I always executed in my companies because I wanted my senior level and my mid-level managers to gain the experience and have the exposure to get to know these PE professionals. And again, in a casual dinner or lunch setting, they would then have the time to get to know each other better. And the PE guys could ask some of those questions that they would not otherwise ask in a more formalized kind of grinder, start, stop, keep structure.
Yeah. Yeah. You also mentioned incentive plans fairly often in our previous conversation. And I think that this incentivization is a critical component to changing behaviors or changing direction, even for the organization. So what role do they play in securing alignment? And what makes a good incentive plan great?
Well, those are two simple questions with complex answers, but I'll start off with, I had the tremendous good fortune for a brilliant man that was the chairman of the parent company that owned our business. So he was chairman and CEO of Macmillan Book Publishing, which in those days was a Fortune 100 company. And then he left, partnered with Coleman Kravis Roberts, formed a new company, and then acquired our company back. But one of the things when we would go to New York to do a presentation on an acquisition, one of the first things he would do, because he understood the value of people and talent, is want to know the background on the team that we were in, the company we were acquiring, and what their compensation structure was. And we tried to run an extremely efficient business, and we tried to sort of set up compensation structures around the middle tier based on industry salary survey and incentive plan analysis. Sometimes he would just look at me and he would go, Cam, pay peanuts, get monkeys. You've got to make sure you're paying at competitive rates in the industry to get the attention of these individuals, and then create incentive programs which incentivizes them to deliver the behavior that you want from them. Mostly that was either top line revenue driven or it was some level of profit driven, whether it was gross profit margin, net income, EBITDA, whatever your measurement tools were. And if it's a product line manager who is responsible for top line and bottom line, then you give him or her an incentive structure which rewards both. Because if you just focus on one, they're smart people that are going to sort of manipulate the situation to maximize whatever level you're incentivizing them at. So the way you structure that is dependent on the individual and what their responsibilities are. But the remaining factor there is so many people set up incentive programs, but their employees on these programs can't understand the plan because they're too difficult. They can't calculate them. At any point in time, if they've achieved a certain goal, they can't correlate that to what that's going to put in their own pocket, or they are never given any kind of financial reporting to let them know where they stand in order for them to take on and make the decisions in their operation that need to be made to get to the goal you're incentivizing them for.
Such an important piece, I feel like, because the communication of the plan is it's separate. Honestly, it's a whole separate piece than just coming up with the plan, right? It's like, okay, you have an idea for a business, but you actually need to implement and execute, right? And so it's the same thing. It's like you have the idea for that incentive plan, whether it be for different types of employees, different outcomes, different behaviors, which makes sense. But those plans can't be laid on top of, a wobbly job architecture or not understanding what the behaviors are at that level or the outcomes and competencies, right? And then being able to communicate. What does that look like? Like, how does leadership communicate incentive plans so it hits home? Like, what does that communication plan look like?
Well, you get feedback really fast. So I'll give you a real world example. The turnaround we did a complete transformation of the sales operation, which had been literally a boiler room, dial for dollars type of an operation to try to sell management and leadership development training services. One of the things I learned in my Start, Stop, Keep is that I thought that operation was running effectively. And what I learned was it was a total mess. They were having 100% turnover every year.
Whoa.
So yeah, literally. So we had 50 people in there, and it was actually an IT guy when he came into my office, which we did on a closed door private basis. So they knew it was confidential. And he literally slid a piece of paper across the table to me, one of those small round conference tables. I said, well, what's this? He said, take a look at that. That's the number of employees we've hired and fired or that left in the sales operation in the last year. And just like your reaction, Felicia, I was stunned. I mean, I've seen situations where there was significant turnover. Usually that's in the 20 or 30% range if there's a problem. So we completely converted that to a professional business development team of about 22 professional consultant type salespeople with defined territories. And we had to build a new incentive plan for them. And my VP of HR and I and my VP of sales, we spent tons of time trying to construct a plan that we thought would be attractive to them and give them an opportunity to make a lot of money, especially if they really over-delivered, because the more we sold, the higher our margins were. And I'll be honest, it was a freaking disaster. We almost had mutiny on our team because they hated it. And we were blown away because we were proud. We thought we'd done all this work and research. So we just said, okay, we've got to listen to this. So we just sat down with each one of those individuals one-on-one and said, okay, what's the problem here? What do you like? What do you not like? What do you hate?
Yeah.
And we had to completely revamp that. And we came out with a great plan once we had been through that process. But, if we had taken the attitude of suck it up, this is what it's going to be, we'd had significant mutiny of some pretty talented individuals that we had worked really hard to recruit, to bring on board, to turn that part of the operation around. So yeah, that's why your question is so complex, is what might seem easy can be very difficult, and you might not be able to anticipate the reaction or disincentive that the people that are on that plan might interpret.
We'll be right back. Back to the show. The other part about it is that incentive plans for sales teams is just it's its own ballgame. It's not like the normal employee that maybe it could be an engineer, it could be someone in HR, could be someone in finance. But for sales, because their job is to hit specific numbers, specific revenue, and
Correct.
You have to kind of almost follow or understand the market to really know what kind of incentive plans they're capable of reaching, right? Because you don't want to put together a plan where they're like, oh, okay, well, you didn't meet your mark and therefore you get nothing of your split, your 50-50 split. I mean, you have to make plans that you can also support them so they can achieve them, and then give them the opportunity to say, hey, if you go the extra mile, here's what the cost is for us, but also we understand that this is the price that we pay for you to continue and retain you and retain our business and forward. So it's just a whole other place, a whole other ballgame. Like, what would be your maybe one or two major advice for creating incentive plans specifically for sales teams?
Well, you pretty much touched on it here a second ago, Felicia. Is, if you setting sales goals or financial performance targets, it's oftentimes kind of a voodoo science, because there are factors that can impact any given territory differently from another. One of the key mistakes that people setting those plans make is that they set the bar too high so that the individual with the plan sees it as unattainable, and they're out from the beginning. They may stay there and keep their job if they've got a good enough package, or they may keep it until they go find something else. But if they see that as an unattainable goal, or if you set levels above that, which you may put some really rich rewards on, but they're so crazy far above their realistic attainment that they just see it as sort of a token that you're trying to say you can throw at me.
Yeah.
But there's one other part to the sales management area in particular, which, again, it was fascinating. I've learned this over the years, is you also have to understand the individual and what motivates that individual. So besides sales compensation plans, oftentimes businesses run different kinds of contests. And you typically think that, if the team hits X in sales, then everybody gets $1,000 or $5,000, whatever the number might be. But that is not always the incentive that really motivates people. One of the best contests I ever ran, I was in the early days of big screen TVs when there was still a big giant box. And one of my sales guys on the West Coast hit his number, and he won a big screen TV. Not many people had them back in those days. And went to his house for dinner one time, and his wife looked at me and smiled. And she said, do you know that every time we have somebody over here, my husband points to that TV and says, I won that in a sales contest. And that validation was so motivating for him. Tangible elements were more valuable to him than if I had given him the $2,000 cash than it would cost him to go out and buy that TV.
That's interesting that you said that. I interviewed an entrepreneur on another episode, and we were talking about employee engagement. And she was saying how one of the things that she does is she invites family members or friends to events and then recognizes employees in front of their family members. And it becomes such a big part of their culture and making sure that people feel recognized, not just by their peers, but by the people that they love, their family and their closest friends, was such a big incentive for engagement and for retention that it blew my mind, because I had never seen or heard that before. It was a strategy that she had brought up during the interview. And I feel like that's very similar, right? It's not just the tangible. I feel like it's also the fact that he's able to sit there, and any friend or family that walks in his door, he's able to recognize himself, which I think is very important. You should be recognizing yourself and praising yourself for good work and feeling confident. That fuels the confidence that he can do at work. It fuels his motivation. And then he comes back to work and he's like, I'm ready to buy, or I'm ready to win a new big screen TV again, or the next thing, right? So that social validation, I think, is also important.
Yeah. And the support and encouragement of a spouse or a partner, if the individuals have them, is also extremely important and valuable. I've run a number of contests over the years where for hitting certain goals, the salesperson could win a trip, nice Hawaii or a resort in Arizona in the winter, something like that. And it would be a longer term contest. And we would send out regular postcards to that salesperson's home addressed to his or her spouse or partner, telling them how far along their salesperson in our company was towards hitting that goal to be able to take that trip. Talk about some additional motivation that we could not create in our office environment, but a spouse or partner certainly can add to the level of enthusiasm and focus of those employees and have some fun with it at the same time.
Yes. And another question on that note is, what's your strategy for identifying rising talent? So these people that are winning these contests and are following this behavior within the portfolio companies, and how do you accelerate their development to really support the growth?
Well, if you're really in touch with your employees or your managers you're going to hear that because they're going to see what's occurring there. But there's one other thing that was a common practice for me. When I was running the large media business, we had 2,000 employees in, I think, 23 U.S. cities. And I would travel around to meet with my site manager there. Could have been a publisher, VP, whatever. But I would always arrange for a roundtable lunch of 6 to 8 employees chosen on an at-random basis. So over a casual lunch setting, you could really get to know people in a different way than you otherwise would. And then I always had my on-site manager there who was working with those individuals on a daily basis. And because we were such a rapid growth company, our senior team had a mandate to identify and help nurture, lower level to mid-level talent, because we were going to need to move up the ranks fast as we took on additional acquisitions, and we needed internal team members that knew our systems and processes to begin to work in a more senior level management role.
Awesome. And I have one more question for you. This is like a burning question, which is, how do you know when this alignment, right? You've done the incentivization, you've recognized your top talent, and you've talked about culture, you've interviewed people, you have this rich data. How do you know when alignment has been achieved? And what signs or outcomes tell you that the business leadership and the PE firm are truly rowing in the same direction?
Well, first of all, you never stop achieving alignment, because if you assume you're there, you've begun the process of losing it. And again, a big part of that, in my experience, involves what kind of managers are in place. So again, if you have a collaborative management style where you are open to input from employees at all different levels, but certainly from your senior management team. That's how you know if there is alignment. If you've got cancer in the organization, it's going to begin to rear its ugly head pretty quickly. I like to approach things on a servant leadership basis, where it was my job to first and foremost find out what tools and resources my experts needed and provide them with that and support that. And when I hired those individuals, I'm talking VP level, C level team members, the last question I would ask them in an interview is simply this: if you need to, are you going to be afraid to disagree with me? Because if you are, you're going to be of no value to me. I don't get it right all the time. My goal is to get it right. Now, I may ultimately not agree with you and make my original decision, but I can't improve things if I don't get the input from my experts, because I always believe, know what you know how to do well and do it. Know what you don't know how to do well and hire experts to do it for you. So I surrounded my team with top-level CFOs, VPs of HR, senior marketing professionals, and certainly my CIO. So they were my right and left hands and other hands if I'd had more hands.
Cameron, I couldn't have said it better myself. This was excellent insight. I mean, you've turned around 50 or more companies. I mean, that's crazy. You are the ultimate know-how of culture of PE and portfolio companies. And it's just a pleasure hearing you and listening to you speak about these. So thank you so much for spending time with me and our listeners today. I really appreciate it. And it's been a blast.
Well, great. I hope I've been able to offer something that'll be of help. If they want to reach me, they can find me on LinkedIn or Cameron.Bishop@Raincatcher.com.
If today's episode captured your interest, please consider sharing it with a friend and leaving a review. To learn more about how CPO Playbook can support you or a leader you know with executive coaching or organizational transformation, visit us at cpoplaybook.com. Your support as a subscriber means the world to us, so thank you for tuning in. I'm Felicia Shakiba. Let's connect on LinkedIn.